Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment. As you guys know, it is my custom here to welcome our guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things very expensive in my eyes. Time. Time is such a beautiful commodity. And we all have 24 hours on this planet. No man has more or less. And so, what we do with our time will speak volumes of who you are. One must learn to respect, honor, and give her the full due that she is, and she will teach us much. And you guys need to learn how to utilize her. The other is the journey. The journey housed who we were and created who we are. And so we want to honor Jayson for coming and sharing both of these precious commodities with us so that we can learn from him to become better human spirits while we occupy this beautiful place that they keep telling us is called the earth. So, Jayson, welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It is an honor. Introduce yourself to the people. Tell them how you serve mankind, because I asked that question because I wanted to, for the individual that hears, that it's a grand thing. It's just not this little thing. When we look at ourselves, we offer value to mankind as we go through our journey and so forth. So, how do you serve mankind?
Yeah, well, that is something that I'm continuing to develop and hone, as I move along. I'll start with a little bit about my background is, coming out of my undergraduate studies, I was in the Marines for 5 years. I served um, as a captain in the United States Marine Corps. I did 2 tours, and we can get into that. I was both an intelligence officer and a platoon commander for a scout sniper platoon during my second deployment. And so had a wide range of really, intense, but also really great experiences. I've had some excellent training in leadership and just, had a wide array of really great experiences with individuals during that time period and overcame some challenges. And at the end of those 5 years, I realized that I had done everything in the Marines that I had set out to do. I had participated in the conflict that was going on at the time, and I had also been able to serve as a platoon commander and lead my own team. And so it was time for me to move on to the next mission statement of my life. So then I got out of the Marines. I've since obtained a couple of graduate degrees, worked as a college professor, worked as a business consultant, and now as an author. And what I'm trying to do in the book is simply give back and relay to people those lessons that were taught to me. What was given to me when I went into the Marines was a code or an ethos. It was a way of living that I call the warrior's way of living, the warrior spirit, which involves a number of different things. I break it down in the book into 4 primary virtues, which is servant leader mentality, living with truth and honesty, living with strength and power, and then living with fortitude. So that's what I try to relay to the readers. That's the way I'm trying to serve right now, and it's really in response to the experiences I've had in my life, both good and bad. The great experiences being those that I'm kind of bringing up, like those in the military, and then some of the bad experiences. Getting out of the Marines, I found that there was this big hole in my life, kind of a loss of identity, which I had to struggle through. And I went on a really kind of a downward spiral for a while, trying to figure out what is the purpose of my life now that this huge piece of my life is gone, and how do I turn around and serve people in a new way. And so this is my attempt to do that.
That is awesome. I always tell people that that story that you just told is always a moving target because
Yes,
the individual is constantly growing. As the individual is constantly growing, their mission statement, as you said, will begin to evolve in different things, adding different things and so forth. So I always make it a point to say that what you're doing right now, because I know how that is. And once someone becomes aware of who they are, complacency becomes an enemy, and we do not like complacency, and it kind of helps in our motivation to move forward. One of the customs that we have here, Jason, is to go back. We call it the first space that we hang out for a few years. We call it the family, where mom and dad is going to now welcome us into this tribe, if you will, and they're going
Mm-hmm.
to program you and I with some information that they have acquired through their lives and so forth. And they're not going to deposit data into you and your household. What was your family like? And invite us to that location, if you will.
Yeah, so I grew up in a family that my mom and dad stayed together. They got together in high school, and now they've been together for more than 35 years. And so, in that respect, it was
Wow.
very loving. Grew up in a loving family. Had two younger brothers, so there was three boys in the household, which so was rather rambunctious at times. Um, we all were teenagers at the same time, so
Yeah.
the food was quite expensive for a period of time.
Yeah, I know about that with my mom and dad. We had five of
uh,
us.
let's see what else. So I grew up kind of lower middle income,
Hmm.
and for a period of time, when I was younger, my family struggled a bit with money, and because my dad was, the sole provider for the family. So there was a year of my life actually that stands out where we actually weren't living in a house. We were living in an RV, like campsite, and
Yeah,
and so, having five people and a dog, living, in a 35-foot RV is a rather tight space.
yeah,
And so you get really close with each other. There's, inevitable conflict. But the one message that was always drilled into me and that I really took to heart was that it doesn't matter where you're living. You can be living in a cardboard box, or you can be living in a 5-story mansion. What really matters is whether or not there's love and there's commitment between the people there.
yeah.
And
I agree.
so whether or not it doesn't matter your living situation. It's the fact that we're all together, we're a family, and we're going to stick by each other through thick and thin. And so it was that really communal respect for each other, for other people,
Hmm.
and sticking together through the hard times that I really internalized. And I think that it served me well. As now I'm trying to start my own family. Got a 3-month old. My first kid right now. That
Congratulations.
Thank you. And even when I was in the Marines, it's like just a reinforcement of that idea that we're a team, and so our
Yeah,
responsibility extends beyond ourselves. It's also our responsibility to our family, to our unit, to the broader mission that we're trying to accomplish.
yeah. How did um, that whole situation with being in that financial squeeze, if you will, for a period of time? How did you relate to the outside folks, mom and dad, granted you powerful lesson as to location doesn't really matter, but
Mhm.
who you are within that location speaks volumes of yourself. How did you relate to others? Because you know how people are and how kids are on
Mhm.
the outside, and they can be um, a little different. If you will, they'll be a little more judgmental. If you know what I'm talking about. How
Yeah.
was your relationship with the others on the outside?
I grew up in a pretty supportive community as far as friends are concerned.
Hmm.
Never really the most popular kid. I always had trouble making friends. I think that was mostly just my personality type.
Yeah.
Um, my brother, everywhere we went, and then in the first 30 seconds, he made like a new best friend, and I was kind of so but those friends I did have, I wouldn't say they were very judgmental, but I was also keenly aware at all times that I kind of came from a little bit less, and so I think
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
I grew up with a bit of a kind of a chip on my shoulder.
Hmm.
and saying that, yeah, I might be here now, but I'm not always going to be here. One day I'm going to prove everybody else wrong. Both in terms of maybe monetary accomplishments, but also from the fact of like the point of view that I wasn't the most popular kid, and
Yeah.
so a bit of a chip on my shoulder there, saying like, well, I don't need you guys. I'm going to be, I'm going to make my own way in the world, and
Yeah.
and it's something that I still kind of struggle with today, as I have a very independent spirit, and so
Yeah.
my wife has come to know this about me, that if we're going to have like a party or we're going to have friends over, probably she's going to be the one that's putting it together.
That's a funny
So,
one.
like,
I think.
together well. I've
Yeah.
certainly tried to expand my own sphere of comfort. So definitely become much more comfortable in interpersonal communication and trying to
Yeah.
open myself up to friends. It's just not something that ever comes easily to me.
Yeah. One of the reasons why Jason and I asked those questions because I always tell people as kids we will make this statement. I call it the statement of faith, meaning that that little kid
Mm-hmm.
believes what he said more than anything else, more than mom and dad. And it's usually based on a situation that we are in. We see from the outside, we're looking at that, and you, as you said, I may be here right now, but I'm not going to be here forever. And that decision, that internal decision. And I think, personally, Jason, is that sometimes we tap into our subconscious being. And I believe that when we make a decision from there,
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing that drives us because people make decisions from here all day long and never do anything. But the one that is
Right.
made here, so there's this little kid that says this, and then he begins to be that, what he says in his mind or her mind, what that means to them will
Mm-hmm.
manifest and begin to govern their life for a while. So you're heading in the direction where you're going to prove it to the people, if you will, and you're looking towards school. Um, why did you pick the field that you did um, when you're heading in that direction? Because again, you had determined within yourself that I'm gonna be something. I'm gonna move from where we are right now.
Well, I think I wanted to prove something to other people, but I also there was that need to prove myself to myself,
Mm-hmm.
figure out who I was, because I really wasn't sure who I was, and I think maybe most people when they're in undergraduate, when they're young man, young woman, I think maybe a lot of people are in that situation, but I definitely was. I had a lot of
Yeah.
insecurity, and I wanted to prove myself to myself. So when I was at school, that's what interested me first in the military. Is I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to see what I was capable of, and I wanted to prove that I could be, that I could be one of the best. I could stand toe to toe with the best, and that I could come out and be successful.
Yeah.
So that's
Uh,
what interested me in the military. It's not
yeah.
just. I grew up in a family that was very supportive of everyone who serves. My uncle was a highway patrol officer, and I actually got to go to his funeral. He died rather young from smoking lung cancer, so it was a very sad occasion. But I also got to see all the respect that from his fellow officers that showed up and gave speeches attesting to his bravery, his courage, his service. And I always like that made an impression on me of like, okay, how am I going to be able to live up to this? What can I do? Um,
Yeah.
that was certainly played a role in it. I've always had a huge respect for those people who serve, whether it be teachers, whether it be police officers, whether it be military. But when it came down to it, I wanted to prove that I could do it, that I could hack it, and I could be the best.
When you got there and you began to move forward in your quest
Mm-hmm.
to show who you are, um, and you began to um, be tested, if you will. They
Mm-hmm.
began to, I tell people, we are all being programmed all day long. If you understand how to utilize that programming, could be very effective. So here you are, they're now conditioning you to the point where you are going to become, I call it, this is the reason why they're conditioning you, because they want to have a conditioned response, meaning that you're trained so often that when a situation arises, you're
Mm-hmm.
able to respond from just reflex at that time because you've put in the work, if you will. How were
Mm-hmm.
you when you were placed into that type of format? Because you're coming in, new guy, but you have this drive to see who you are. How did you function within that sphere, if you will?
Yeah, it's funny you should bring this up because I was actually just writing about this over the past couple days. I'm working on a new book. It's a collaborative book with a good friend of mine. The title of the book, the working title right now, is Coaching Greatness, and it's
Mm-hmm.
all about how to, the intersection of leadership, coaching, and greatness. That's what my chapter is going to be about. I go through this, this topic, what I like to refer to as invitational leadership.
Yeah.
And part of that is telling a bit of my story and driving into those training grounds for the first time and what was going through my head, realizing that because I'd gone from San Diego to Quantico, Virginia, which is where the training is conducted, and you drive from the airport to the training grounds. They put you in like an old, like refashioned school bus, and you're driving in
Mm-hmm.
there, and you're miles and miles and miles of lush green wilderness, and just you look around yourself and you just realize, like, for me it was, okay, I'm truly alone right now, meaning I don't have any friends or family around me, so this is like the first time in my life when I really have to kind of rely on myself. And yes, I'm going to
Yeah.
make new friends and all that, but that hasn't happened yet, so this one's going to be up to me. I can't rely on my family to get me through. And so as we were going through that, there's several things that they teach you in training. That one is that you're going to make mistakes. They tell you all
Yeah.
the time, mistakes, and making a mistake is not the critical issue, right? Because we're all going to do that.
Yeah.
What is the critical issue is how you respond to those mistakes and whether or not you can learn from them and pick yourself up and continue moving forward. Um,
Yeah.
you're going to be told that you suck a lot. They're going to try to break you down a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, and because they want to know whether or not you're going to be able to bounce back. Whether or not you have that self confidence inside yourself to be able to pick yourself back up and keep going.
Yeah.
Um, one of the first lessons I learned that stands out in my mind about leadership is that we were put in it was like a little makeshift training, scenario where I'm trying to move, being the leader, and you have to, like, I think I had to move an ammo can from point A to point B up and over a couple obstacles, and you have to maneuver your team through the little challenge within like a
Mm-hmm.
5-minute timeline or whatever. And I remember I spent so much time trying to solicit advice from my other team members that I actually ran out of time because I was trying to come up with like a
Yeah.
collaborative,
Collaborative.
yeah, yeah. So leading about collaboration rather than actually taking charge and leading.
Yeah.
And so they told me, like, you failed this event because you spent so much time trying to be everybody's friend. You're the leader. You need to tell
Yeah.
them what they're. Soliciting advice is great, but you do that in the first 30 seconds, and then you pick up, then you tell everybody what they're doing, then you go. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
whether or not I necessarily agree with you. That's not the job of the leader. The leader is to accomplish the mission first and foremost, and especially when you're in a time compressed environment.
Yeah.
And so that was like the first thing that was impressed upon me. You completely failed this leadership event.
Mm.
What are you going to do about that? And so from there, I picked it up. And the next time I was in that, it was about a month later. The next time I was doing that, I accomplished it. And I was one of the few people to actually accomplish the mission, because they
Wow.
don't care if you accomplish the mission. What they actually care about is your leadership principles as you're going through. Whether or not you actually accomplish it, that's kind of secondary to them. What they want to see
Yeah.
is your process and what you're going through. And so I ended up accomplishing it. And not only that, I got top marks in the leadership category as well.
Yeah.
So it's about, how you respond to criticism is one of the key things that they impress on you very, very early.
Yeah. Critical thinking skills, man. How do you move from point A to B when you
Yeah.
have all obstacles being tossed at you all the time? So that's they throw you in the hot water. One of the greatest lessons I've ever learned when I was working in about leadership and mistakes. And guys, people that are listening to us, perfection is the enemy of personal growth. I've been trying to tell you this from the day this podcast started. There's no such thing. Um, we will always continue to grow, and perfection. Uh, if you chase that, it's like the wind. You will get there, and it will not be there. So you have to learn that and become um, accepting of it, that there's no such thing. And once you have that understood, then whatever happens as you're moving, as Jayson said, what we call mistakes. Sometimes I wonder, I wish we had a better word than that, because what it is, it's a learning experience, and it's really wasn't a mistake. It's just
Right.
you you did something and you realize that that's not the thing that worked or would work. And I think it's more of a learning thing than a mistake, but I get it. That's the word that we use to describe that. I was a
Well,
project manager. Go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I agree with that completely. So, like, this is something I've taught, um, my students at university, and it's something that I employ when I'm writing. Is I say that my job when I first start writing is to just write a first draft, and the first
Yeah.
draft is probably bad, but that's okay.
Hmm.
You know, it's all about getting what's in here, what's up here, but mostly in here, just out on the page. And
Yeah.
so, in order to do that, my actual process is that I separate myself. Normally, it's in the morning with a little bit of coffee because that's just the way I like doing it. And I need to shut myself off from the world. And then what I do, instead of writing on a computer, because a computer is very easy to hit that backspace, that dreaded little
Yep.
backspace button, because the sentence isn't perfect or you don't like
Yeah.
the way it sounds, and so you end up with a blank page after staring at it for 30 minutes. So what I do is I actually have a notebook with like a pen in my hand, and I just
Yeah.
keep on writing. And it doesn't matter whether or not I think the sentence is good or whether I think the paragraph is structured properly, because I can fix all that in editing. All that
Yeah.
really matters in that first draft is getting everything out, getting a bad first draft, because I can tweak and edit a bad first draft, but you can't tweak or edit something that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So
I
just
agree.
having something out there and getting all your ideas out on the page. First of all, they're no longer in here, so that'll actually reduce your stress level. I find that that's what it does to me. Is when I'm able to get my ideas out on a page, I no longer have to like keep them up in my head all the time. It's no longer keeping me awake at night. It's out on a page, and then I can just work with it from there and fine tune it. And so, like, to your point, it's is that first draft, is that a mistake? No, but that doesn't mean
Yeah.
it's not the final draft either. It's
Hmm.
just the first draft, and that's all it needs to be.
Yeah. There's a scripture in the Bible that says, write down the vision. And I'm like you, I have a notepad that I have to write it down. I'm old school. I have to touch the paper and see it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And it was the very same process I did with my books when I wrote it. I just sat down and emptied myself.
Hmm.
Um, I have people that will do the editing. Sometimes, I'll go and read it, but I have people that I'm work with, and I'm like, okay, I've just vomited this thing. Can you help me help me clean it up, if you will,
Yeah.
And but my goal as yours, I wanted to empty myself. I wanted to get it out because, as I mentioned on the onset, we're all meditators. All of us. The human being is a meditator, and if you don't empty yourself of it, you will be meditating on it all the time. And next thing you know, you're stressing yourself. Your expectation of not doing anything with it is going
Hmm.
to cause you some stress. So here you are, you're in there, you're learning. You had the vision, as you said, of you going in and the initial feelings that you had. When you got there and you began to go deeper into the training process, uh, Jayson, when you began to uh, deal with the guy, as you said, the terminology you guys learn as you're in there. Um, um, Watch My Six and all those different things. You start learning all of those language, the everything. How
Hmm.
did you begin to perform within that? You as the individual, how did you manage yourself in there?
A lot of it was putting my head down and just going forward through kind of the tough times. There's periods of where you just kind of have to gut it through, and you're learning all along the way. And you want to ask questions. The instructors will ask you to do something that maybe doesn't make sense, even though later you realize it did make sense. You just didn't understand it at the time. So it's just trusting the process, and realizing that you can make it through. And if it seems bad, or you seem like you're at the end of your rope, you're really only about 70% of the way there, because you are capable of so much more than you actually think that you are. So that was part of it. The other part of what I started doing was really forming very close bonds of friendship with the other people in the platoon that were with me. But I found nothing forms bonds of friendship and closeness better than adversity and hardship and a little bit of suffering. I used to joke with one of my close friends in the Marines that there's businesses that do these leadership retreats because they want all the people to kind of mesh and become friends and work together closely. And we always used to joke, like, if we could put some of them and take them to like a week of Marine Corps training, that would form closer bonds of friendship than perhaps any little trip out in the woods ever would, because you either come together as a team and survive and make it through, or you remain individuals and you're going to fail. That's just simply the way it is.
I think there's a couple of guys that I knew, ex-military guys, that are doing that at a corporate level, where they are bringing them on the field and teaching them, you will either succeed together or you will die apart. And so they have to learn those principles within a pressure, if you will, the hard times, and where they push them through training and stuff like that to do that. I know of a couple of them that are doing it right, man. You guys had it. You had the idea when you were in the trenches, if you will. So here you are, you've gotten to learn all these different principles and stuff like that, and the greatness that is residing inside of you, the power of the mind. Any athlete will know that, and I tell people, when you're in the military, when you're an athlete and you're pushing the body, these are the stuff you hear, terminology like the wall and stuff like that. When you're coming against the wall, that wall is when your body has nothing left to give, but you have to find it somewhere inside of you. And how do you find that? It's inside of your mind. That's where that stuff, it'll push you beyond that. So as you're training and learning all of those techniques, because it's going to be how you're going to come out with that information, if you will. So here you are, you talked about your tours and so forth, and the tours, you've been through your training, and now you did the dress rehearsal, and now it's showtime. It's showtime, and there's no more practice. This is the real stuff. The bullets are flying over, and you have to incorporate all of your training, your mental awareness and stuff like that. Jayson, when you were there, your team is there, you guys are there. You have your lax time or whatever, but when it got a little tight, if you will, how did you, and you talked about leadership, how did you begin to lead, and how did you begin to see your leadership skills beginning to manifest at a faster rate, if you will?
The big thing that I learned about leadership is that leadership is probably about 75% about listening, which seems to predict what I said earlier about. But when I was speaking earlier, I said, when you're in a time compressed environment, you can't lead by collaboration, which is true. But when you're not in a time compressed environment, it's a lot about listening to your men and to the people that you're in charge of, and seeing, just asking them, what do you need? What, how can I help you? I always viewed my job as a leader as empowering my subordinates in order to do their jobs most effectively. So it's not micromanaging. That's the theory of military leadership is all about pushing decision making ability down to the lowest possible level and empowering your subordinates to be able to do their jobs most effectively. So,
Yeah.
just asking, how are you feeling? How's things back at home? And we had some really terrible things going on, like, back home, whether that be, issues with their family, issues with their spouse. And if they're distracted like that, they can't perform effectively at their jobs, right? Because
Yeah.
that's all back of their minds.
Yeah.
So listening to them and then figuring out what you can do to either remove obstacles, to take something off their plate, or to empower them further in order to be able to do their jobs. That's like the greatest military or leadership lesson that I learned when I was over in Afghanistan, and then when I did my subsequent deployment over to the Western Pacific. It's all about, leadership is a people business. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all about understanding people. Um, and And in order to understand people, you need to spend time with them. It's not
Yeah.
just about sitting in your office and then kind of delegating or looking at a spreadsheet. If you want to understand what's really going on, go and sit in the barracks room. Go and actually spend some time out on the field with them, and then just talk. Just listen to what they're saying. Um, Look at their demeanors. Pay attention. That's the biggest thing. Paying
Mm-hmm.
attention to what's going on. And I've seen leaders that have literally been like talking to me and saying, I don't know what's going on in my team. I don't know how I can help them. And I kind of look over and I see, like, I see something going on. Like, one of their guys seems to, have his head hanging low, and he doesn't, seem like he's in the best spirits. I'm like, well, why don't you go talk to him right now and ask him
Yeah.
what's going on? Pick your head up, actually pay attention to what's going on instead of, being aloof from your men.
Yeah. It's always about making your people better. And when you do that, they will always perform better. And you
Well,
do that, as you state, by talking with them.
it's about investing in them and showing that you
Yeah.
actually, right?
Yeah.
People
Mm-hmm.
tell people can tell if you're using them
Mm-hmm.
instrumentally,
Yeah.
or whether you actually care, right? There's a bit of
Yeah.
like, people have a feeling, people have a sense, people kind of, there's kind of a smell to it, right? Like
Yeah.
the intent that you have, um, the attitude that you have, and how you treat them. People don't like being treated instrumentally, but if you can prove and demonstrate that you actually care about them and their well-being, and that you're interested in their developments, they'll be incredibly loyal and they will move mountains for you. But you have to make the first step and actually demonstrate that you actually care for them.
Yeah. Empathy is part of leadership. Getting down. There's so many lessons about that all over life and in every arena. So here you are. You're moving through life, and you're coming out. You're out. You're back home, and we know all. I mean, hear the stories is how difficult sometimes it takes to make that transition, because
Mm-hmm.
again, this is something that you've been doing for many years, and then all of a sudden you're home, um, at the on the farm, if you will, and you have the family, and you have to assimilate into normalcy, as they say to us. And that transition can be a drastic one. How did you, and you mentioned it with yourself on the onset, that it was a little tough. Explain that uh, in layman's term, if you will, a little tough. What was it that started to happen to you, and how did you uh, eventually manage to propel yourself from that dark space into moving into where you are today?
Really, um, didn't really know exactly what I was going to do. I knew I was going to go back to school.
Yeah,
But the meaning and the purpose of going to school is not exactly the same as when you're in the military, when you're in the Marines. That forms your entire identity.
yeah,
And so getting out of the Marines, it was just like one day you're a Marine, one day you're not. And that mission statement is just gone. In my book, I call it the problem of the modern day Ronin. A
yeah.
Ronin, the samurai term,
Hmm.
Japanese term of the samurai. And what happens if a samurai were trained from the age of 5 in military leadership, in military tactics, in swordsmanship, and they were trained to serve their master. And sometimes, though, whether it be through warfare or other unfavorable circumstances, a samurai would lose his master, and so a samurai without a master was called a ronin,
Mm-hmm.
and they were without purpose. They were without meaning. The word Ronin is actually made with the Japanese characters for floating and man, meaning a floating man, a person adrift without any anchor, without any purpose,
Yeah.
being to and fro. And so some of them would commit suicide, which we've seen plenty of veterans commit suicide. Some of them would get involved in thievery or banditry or just go to whatever warlord raised the battle flag because they wanted to fight. They wanted a meaning and a purpose. And so I kind of felt a shadow of that same, lost purposelessness when I transitioned out of the Marines. And for me, it resulted in a good deal of anxiety, depression. I started self-medicating for a while because I just didn't know what to do. I had
Yeah.
time on my hands, but I didn't know, what the purpose of my life truly was going to be. And it was only by kind of coming back to the core principles that I learned in the Marines about service, the service mentality, about living life with truth and with strength and power and with fortitude, which are the primary virtues I talk about in my book. It was only by coming back to those that I was able to pull myself out of that and start putting, my life back together again.
As you did that, you know, you have many brothers and sisters that are
Mm-hmm.
probably still in that space right now, Jayson, and you, better than I, would know how to communicate with them right there because I know we have some listeners that are military and ex-military from them
Mm-hmm.
getting in touch with me. I want you to talk a little. Let's linger here a minute because that is a tough transition for many.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, you have many brothers and sisters out there that are in that space. Remind them, if you will, some of those principles that you were able to reconnect with, in order to pull you up, for you to stand up, to begin to take the steps to move from the depression and all of the different self-medication and so forth, to begin
Yeah.
to stand and breathe. Talk to them a little and remind them, if you will, about some of those principles that you were trained with. But because of your situation, it's easy to forget it, as you've known personally yourself.
Yeah. There's something I've run into uh, with myself and many times when I'm talking to veterans, um, and that's when you're in the military, you're taught this radical form of responsibility, especially when you're on the battlefield, and that's taking ownership of absolutely anything that happens, not making excuses, and treating it as if it's your job, um, your problem to fix. Right? Doesn't matter if
Yeah,
it was your fault, but you're going to take ownership of it. And that's that form of radical ownership, radical responsibility, absolutely has a place when you're on the battlefield. The problem is oftentimes returning home and being unable to let go of some of the things that happened when you were overseas,
yeah,
whether that's something that happens in a gunfight, something that you did, something that happened to you, something that happened to your team. Um, and a lot of people that I've found, I call it in the book, I call it kind of a form of self denigration. You get to a point where you just think that it was all your fault because you were taught this form of radical responsibility, and it's really kind of the opposite problem of what we see um, kind of going on in the culture right now. Is this sort of victim mentality where everything is somebody else's fault and
yeah.
you're the of circumstance. Well, the opposite of that is this form of radical ownership, radical responsibility, where everything's your fault. And I think that, for me, I definitely fell into that where, I started to doubt who I was. I started to doubt some of the decisions I had made. And it was only by going through and realizing that you really have to kind of dig into what happened, and you really have to
Yeah.
do a couple of things. One is realize that, if you make a decision and it has a bad outcome, a lot of times we think that that means you made a bad decision. Not
Yeah.
always. Not
Yeah.
always. Sometimes you made the best decision that you could with the information that you had at the time, right?
Hmm.
You were in a stressful situation, you had certain amount of information, and you made the best decision that you could. Sometimes that means that a good outcome happens. Sometimes that means that a bad outcome happens. The simple example that they talk through when you're in like a decision analytics course in business school is a simple case of somebody who buys a lottery ticket versus somebody who takes the time to study and make an educated investment in a business, right?
Yeah.
Now, most of us would say that, you know, buying a lottery ticket is a rather stupid decision. Probably not the
Hmm.
smartest you can make because it's more or less gambling. Whereas taking time to make an educated decision and invest in a business is a smarter decision, a smarter investment decision. But here's the thing: businesses will still go belly up.
Yeah.
They're still fail, and somebody is going to win the lottery.
Hmm.
So if somebody wins the lottery, does that mean that they retroactively made a good decision to buy a lottery ticket? No,
Yeah.
it was still a terrible
Yeah.
decision. It just had a
Yep.
good,
Outcome. Yeah.
yeah. Firstly,
Yeah.
somebody took time to invest in a business and then that business fails to think, well, I made a bad decision. It's like, no, you
Yeah.
made a good decision. It just unfortunately had a bad outcome. And there are
Yeah.
situations like that in life where you made the best decision that you could. And you need to understand that. You need to understand you made the best decision you could at the time in a stressful environment where you didn't have all the information available to you. And maybe something unfortunate happened as a result of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Firstly, there might be some times when you made a poor decision. Maybe you weren't everything that you intended to be. You kind of let yourself down in a certain area, and that's okay too. Like giving yourself a certain amount of grace to the point of realizing that you're human. You have your failings. You may have been 21 or 22 years old when you made that decision, and now and the idea that 21 and 22-year-olds make poor decisions, that's not exactly news to most of us, right? Too, you make a lot of stupid decisions. That just happens. Much
Yeah.
less in a combat environment and stress is so extremely high and you really think that you might die at any moment. So
Yeah.
giving grace, realizing that even if you did make a poor decision, even if you did let yourself down, that's part of being human.
Yeah.
And that from there is saying, okay, now that I've realized that, now that I've kind of dissected this, how am I going to make, if this decision comes up again, what am I going to do in the future?
Yeah.
And once you understand that, once you understand how you've changed and how you've grown from a decision that you made, that's I think when the healing process can start, and you can start putting yourself back together, and you can start. It's not exactly letting yourself off the hook, but it's giving yourself the same grace that you give somebody else in the same position, and
Yeah.
then you can start to move past that and kind of start working through whatever it is, the PTSD, the guilt, the um, the lingering feelings of anger or resentment or whatever they are. Once you've understood that, you can start moving through those. At least that's
Yeah.
been my.
Yeah. You have to identify them first so that you know what you're talking with and what you're dealing with. And when you see them, then they become smaller. You're able to manage it. But
Mm-hmm.
to get into that space, one must become humble, patient, forgiving,
Yeah.
all of those different qualities that we look for in a relationship. And I tell them that you're having a relationship, but the relationship is with you. It's the most important relationship you'll have. And based from your relationship with you, you'll be able to have a better understanding of relationships, number one, and you'll be
Mm-hmm.
able to offer that individual that is before you in a relationship
Mm-hmm.
a deeper understanding or a deeper connection because you understand a relationship and because you practice with yourself. So here you are,
Right.
you've gone, you've stepping out, and you began to move forward. Um, Jayson, when was it? At what point in time did you began to think of putting in the format as to all of your training to now bringing it into a format by which you are going to serve, meaning the mindset, the warrior belief system and stuff like that, and putting it in the book? How did that thread came about as you're moving through your healing process?
So the inspiration from the book actually came from when we were all during lockdown and COVID, as we might remember. Something
Yeah,
happened in 20 that kind of shook the world. Dating the woman who would now become my wife, and it was a stressful time. We actually met in December of, what was it, 2019? So
yeah,
right before the lockdowns,
right
and then we
before, yeah.
so that's a way to get to know somebody really quickly. Um, just spent like 6 months in lockdown together. So we were the relationship was either going to flourish or was going to fall apart. Ours just happened to flourish. So we were
Yeah.
lucky. Um, but I remember, it was a stressful time for all of us, and there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of hatred going around, and I remember having a lot of this desire to help people, to try to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And
Hmm.
I have a lot of things going on in my head, and the only way that I could actually get to sleep at night, because I was having a lot of trouble sleeping, the only way I could do that was actually to get out my notebook and to write down everything that was going on in my head,
Yeah.
and everything that I would say I wished I could say rather to people, or rather everything I wish I could say to my students, because I was teaching at the time,
Yeah.
and saw a lot of anxiety and hopelessness in the students. And so just writing all these things down, and once they were out of my head, and what ended up happening is my wife, girlfriend at the time, picked up the notebook and read through a couple of the entries that I had written down, and she said, "This is actually really, really good. Have you ever thought about writing a book? Because I think that you could actually really help some people,
Yeah.
based on your experiences and based on what you're saying here." And when she first said that, I was like, "No, no, I'm not an author. That's not for me."
Yeah.
But and she didn't let up, and I started to think about it. I started to say, well, if I was going to write a book, what would the title be? Could I write an outline? And it was that incremental step forward of just taking one step at a time. And then eventually I told myself, maybe I can do this. Um, and at the time, I was also reading a couple of books, and one of them called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, talking about the four primal archetypes of the masculine personality. And when I got
Hmm.
to this warrior archetype, I said, okay, if I'm going to write a book, I could actually maybe write about this, and because I could expand on this, and I could really dive into what it means to be a warrior. And so that was really the impetus for what ended up becoming the book, is realizing that maybe I did have something to offer, and with the encouragement of several of the people around me who had read some of the writing that I had done and told me that it was very good, I started piecing it together piece by piece, and a couple of years later, it turned into a book. So that's how that happened.
Congratulations on that. And you mentioned that you focus on four principles
Hmm.
that you had mentioned, and I want you to go into them briefly for our listeners so that they can have an understanding of what you do, so that when they call, and one of the reasons why I do what I do with the questions and getting the individual, our guests, to talk about it, is because I want to prepare you guys that when you make a call into Jayson's space, and when you buy his book and all these type of things, that you're coming serious. You're coming, you're not playing. You're getting all that playing. You were listening to us for a little while, and it began to, questions began to pop up, and you want to reach out. So when you reach out, you are serious about it, because if you're serious about it, you will have your revelation, your changing, if you will, your and all it is a shift of your perspective. you're seeing your situation a certain way. And you are going to have a conversation with someone who has gone through some training, and he sees his perception, his world, a different way. And so he's going to assist you to shift your perspective just by probing some questions. And once you get it, you'll sit there and go, wow. And then that will open the entrance for you to shift, and your life will begin to change. Jayson, talk to them and let them know some of your four pillars,
Mhm.
if you will. And how did you come about it? And if you can just give them a little taste of each one of those pillars.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Overall problem that I address in the book is, from my perspective, a lot of the timeless warrior virtues that have animated our society, our culture, and really many cultures throughout the world, throughout history, are kind of under attack right now. They've become unfashionable. They've even been called toxic. Things like grit, self-reliance, personal responsibility, gratitude. They're not in vogue anymore. And
Yeah.
so my solution to that is to develop the warrior spirit in yourself.
Yeah.
And so, what is the warrior spirit? I spoke, like you said, I focus on four virtues. The first being the servant leader mentality. The servant leader mentality, we've kind of been talking about that, is this idea that I call invitational leadership. It's realizing that, which is it's the opposite of authoritarian leadership. It means
Hmm.
that people want to follow you. They're not forced to follow you. They want to follow you because of who you are as an individual, because of your
Yeah.
moral character. They realize that you have their best interest at heart. And so we discuss what exactly that means, and we also talk in the book. I discuss how it kind of helps to solve the problem, one of the tensions in our modern society between collectivism and individualism, which are two ideas that are really warring. Whether or not
Hmm.
you're an individual and whether or not you should just focus on yourself, and be concerned primarily with yourself. That's kind of the individualist mindset. Or whether you're part of a group, and whether you're defined by whatever group that you belong to. Neither extreme of which I think is a good idea. And I think that the servant leader mentality really helps to bridge that
Yeah.
difference, realizing that you are an individual in the sense that you have individual autonomy, you also have responsibility for yourself, but it doesn't stop there. You really have to broaden that personal responsibility to take on a more social obligation to your family, to your friends, to you in the military, to your unit, to the other men and women in your unit.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do that, quite honestly, it doesn't matter how good of a shot you are, it doesn't matter how physical you are, it doesn't matter any of that, how good of a tactician you are. If you only care about yourself, you're not wanted in the Marines, you're not wanted in the military, because that's going to be a very toxic and dangerous mindset to have. And so and this is what I've kind of talked to as I've been on a couple different podcasts. So we've talked to the point of, not only is it something that like you should do, you should have that sort of social obligation, but that's also where people generally find the most meaning and purpose in their lives, is
Hmm.
in serving other people. It's not in serving themselves and attaining more for themselves. It's really in realizing what they can do to serve their community, their friends, their family, the world around them. That's where true meaning and purpose is found. So that's the first virtue. The second is, I talk about this idea of truth, which is kind of a complicated topic in our modern society. Again, what is truth? Everybody has their own truth. Um, and so I talk through four principles of truth that help us to understand what it is and help us to understand what being an honest, truthful person really is. I say truth is constrained by reality, meaning we have to not realign reality to ourselves, but kind of help to align ourselves to the reality that's going on. That's
Yeah.
broadening our perspective and being able to understand what's going on. The second is that truth is dependent on perspective, and you kind of talked about this: the conditioning that you have as a child, the experiences that you've had growing up. That's all going to shape the way that you see the world around you. And so one way to affect the world, if you don't like what you see around you, is to change your perspective. And so
Yeah.
we talk about different ways of doing that. Um, the third principle is that truth is it facilitates personal development. It creates warriors,
Hmm.
is the way I say it. Um, and that's the one thing that is beat into you in training, is that um, you're going to be told the truth, the honest truth about whether or not you're meeting the standard or whether you're not. And so that is what eventually forces you to develop yourself personally
Yeah.
and professionally. And the fourth principle of truth is that it's based in action. It's not just something that you do or that you say, right? We all say that actions speak louder than words. And I truly believe that that's the case, that, if you want to truly be an honest person in your life, you have to align your actions with your words.
Yeah.
Only then can you really be an honest person. The third virtue I talk through is kind of a dual virtue. That's strength and power.
Hmm.
And this chapter really kind of confronts the idea of, like, really discussing what is power. There's an idea in our modern culture that like all human interactions, all relationships, all hierarchies, everything is predicated and based on power. And so people have power based on whatever group they belong to or whether position, in the social hierarchy. Um, and I like to flip that around on its head and say, I think that people have strength and have power based on their personal decisions and based on how they develop themselves and based on their competence and who they are as individuals, based on their moral
Yeah.
character, not based on their random, birthright in society, so to speak. And
Yeah.
so that's what the chapter explores. The fourth one
Yeah.
is fortitude, and I kind of talked to this a little bit. The balance between the victimhood mentality on one hand and the self-denigration on the other. Fortitude is when you have hardships and you have suffering that comes into your life, you're faced with something that you don't like. First of all, understanding where that comes from. And the second piece is understanding how you should respond to that, because it's not a question of if storms are going to come into your life. It's a question of when will storms come into your life, and whether or not you're going to be prepared to deal with them, and how you're going to be able to weather that storm relies a lot on the principle of fortitude. And I kind of go into a couple of biblical stories in that chapter, talking about how um, in the biblical stories, very often suffering is seen as a marker for sin.
Hmm.
Something's going wrong in your life, something unfortunate is happening. It could be a sign. Sin just means to miss the mark. It could mean that you're missing the mark in some area,
Yeah.
and so it's a sign for you that, hey, maybe I need to adjust the way I'm living, the way, some of my practices and what's going on in my life. Take a good hard look and realize, where I might be missing that mark a little bit, and adjust accordingly.
Absolutely beautiful. I love it. Um, we are called to be servants. We are not called to be tribal. When we get into tribalism, that's when we get into all the hierarchy thinking, who's in charge as far as that, and who's I'm the boss, and all that type of tribal thinking. But when you are one of a servant, Jesus said, the least among you is the greatest. So
Yes,
it's a totally different benchmark that you're governed
really
when.
flips that on
Yep,
its head.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the principles that I take, one of the Bible stories that I take to teach what you were talking about, how one perception will cause you to sink, if you will, as Peter walking on water. He had a
Mm.
perception. Jesus said, "Come." He said, "If that's you, come." He said, so he's and the condition of that situation, if you read it, storm was all over the place. It was a stormy night, and so he jumps out of the boat and began to walk in the storm.
Mm-hmm.
And then Peter changed his perspective. He
Mm.
began to focus on something else.
Right.
Focus, his perspective is shifted, and the minute his perception shifted,
Mm.
he lost his focus, sank,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we do. Um, but that same perspective, when he switched it from fearfulness and all the other thing, he was able
Mm.
to walk on water. He
Mm.
he he was one of men on the planet that we know through documentation broke the law of gravity and walked on it. So that's a great feat. But he switched his perspective
Mm-hmm.
and began to sink, and he cried out, and Jesus grabbed him and said, "Come on, boy, let's do this thing somewhere else." And so he
Right.
was trying to show them the greatness of who they were, shifting their perspective from tax collectors and fishermen
Mm-hmm.
to fishers of men. And so when
Right.
they did that switch, those boys changed the world as we know it today. So every one of you that are listening and you hear Jayson talking about his story, I want to invite you guys to come get into his books, get the Warrior's Journal, get all those things. I'll provide all the links for you to get into his space. Get in touch with him. Those of you that are in the military, that you were in that dark space, you have a brother that and he can assist you, maybe guide you to places that will be able to help you, assist you to move forward and through from where you're at, and so that you can see you are a warrior and you have that warrior within you. You just need to give him the opportunity to stand up, and he will protect you, as they say. I want to thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment, man. This has been a good one. Thank you so much, sir.
Hey, thanks so much. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. And again, guys, I'm going to provide everything for you guys to reach him because you ought to. And get his books for other family. Many of us have friends that were in the military. Many of us, I have tons of them. I want you guys to buy it and offer his stuff as gifts so that you can help them transition and see that it is capable and someone has some information that they may need to help them where they're at. Again, thank you so much, man.